He learned to stay silent before he learned how to tell the truth. Not because he lacked words, but because words never seemed to change anything. His name was Mark, and all his life he had been the one people called strong. Not loud, not aggressive, just reliable. The kind of man others leaned on, the kind who didn't break. As a child, he learned one rule early. If you don't cause problems, you're left alone. And being left alone felt safer than love. When other kids cried, he clenched his teeth. When someone got angry, he stayed quiet. When something hurt him, he endured it. Over the years, it became part of his character. Then, part of his identity. Adulthood didn't arrive with a clear transition. One day, he simply woke up and realized he was doing everything right, and still felt empty. He had a job where he was respected. He had people who called him a friend. He had women who stayed for a while. But no one truly knew him. And worse, he no longer knew who he was. He lived as if there was a room inside him whose door had long been locked, and the key was either lost or never existed. Late at night, when the city finally went quiet, Mark sometimes caught himself feeling something strange, as if he was constantly playing a role. Even when he was alone, he didn't allow himself weakness. He didn't allow himself to ask for help. He didn't allow himself to stop and ask, what do I actually want? Because the answer might have been terrifying. One day he understood something else, something quiet but painful. He was needed by many, but truly close to no one. The realization didn't come like a blow. It settled slowly, like dust in a room where the windows hadn't been opened in years. And it was during this period of his life that something happened, something that forced him to stop. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just honestly enough that there was no escape. But Mark didn't know yet that this pause would become the beginning. Not of change, but of a painful introduction to himself. It didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with noise or chaos. It came disguised as routine. Mark started waking up earlier than usual, not because he had to, but because sleep no longer gave him rest. The mornings felt heavy, not physically, mentally. He would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to remember when life started feeling like something he had to endure rather than live. Work still happened. People still expected things from him. And he still delivered. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the most dangerous part. One evening, after another long day of being the reliable one, he walked past a bar he had never noticed before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't inviting. It just existed. And for the first time in years, Mark didn't go straight home. He sat alone at the counter, ordered a drink he didn't really want, and listened to the low hum of voices around him. No one knew him there. No one needed anything from him. That felt unfamiliar and relieving. He caught his reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. Older than he felt, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. That's when the question returned, the one he had been avoiding for years. If no one needed you right now, who would you be? He didn't have an answer. That night, he walked home slower than usual. The city lights felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. Memories surfaced without permission. Moments when he wanted to speak, but didn't. Times he chose peace over truth. Relationships that ended quietly, not because of fights, but because of absence. He realized something painful. He wasn't afraid of being rejected. He was afraid of being seen. Because being seen meant someone might notice the emptiness he had been carrying all along. The next day he did something small, almost insignificant. He said no, not to anything dramatic, not to anyone important, just a simple refusal. And yet it felt like rebellion. The world didn't collapse. No one got angry. No disaster followed. That confused him. If saying no didn't destroy everything, what else had he been wrong about? For the first time in a long while, Mark felt something shift inside him. Not hope, not clarity, but discomfort. And discomfort, he was beginning to understand, was a sign that something real was finally happening. He didn't know where this would lead. He only knew one thing. He could no longer pretend that silence was strength. And once you realize that, there is no way
Change
back
didn't
to
arrive
the way
you
Mark
were
expected. There was no moment of clarity, no sudden courage, no dramatic decision that split his life into before and after. Instead, it came quietly, disguised as attention. He began noticing things. How often he apologized when he wasn't wrong. How quickly he filled silence so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. How instinctively he shaped himself to fit expectations that were never clearly stated. It was exhausting. Once you see patterns, you can't unsee them, and Mark was seeing everything. He started walking more. Not for fitness, for space. The city felt different when he wasn't rushing through it. Buildings weren't just obstacles anymore. People weren't just background noise. He noticed faces, men like him, carrying invisible weight, moving forward because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. He wondered how many of them felt the same quiet pressure, the obligation to be steady, dependable, unbreakable, and how few ever asked whether that role still fit. One night, he received a message from someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a name that carried history, someone who once waited for him to open up, someone who eventually stopped asking. The message was simple. I saw something today that reminded me of you. Hope you're doing well. Mark stared at the screen longer than necessary. He felt the old instinct rise, to keep it light, distant, safe. Instead, he paused, and for the first time, he asked himself a different question. What happens if I answer honestly? His reply wasn't poetic. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. I'm figuring things out, slowly, but honestly. He expected nothing, but what he felt afterward surprised him. Relief. Not because of her response, but because he hadn't betrayed himself in the moment. Days passed, then weeks. Mark began making decisions that looked small from the outside, but felt enormous internally. He stopped explaining himself unnecessarily. He allowed pauses in conversations. He let people be disappointed without immediately trying to fix it. And something unexpected happened. The right people stayed. The wrong ones faded. Silently, without confrontation, without chaos. One evening, he found himself back at the same bar, same seat, same mirror behind the bottles. But this time, when he looked at his reflection, something was different. He didn't look lighter. He looked grounded. There were still questions he couldn't answer, still fears he hadn't fully faced. But the emptiness he once carried so carefully, it no longer controlled him. He realized something important. Strength wasn't silence. Strength was the willingness to risk discomfort for truth. On his way home, the city felt familiar again, not because it had changed, but because he had. Life hadn't become easier, but it felt more honest. And honesty, he was learning, creates a different kind of peace. Not loud, not perfect, but real. Mark stood by his window that night, looking out at the city lights. He thought about the man he had been, the one who believed endurance was the same as fulfillment. He didn't judge him. He understood him. That man did the best he could with what he knew. But he wasn't that man anymore. Some people spend their entire lives trying to be what's expected of them. Others stop. Not loudly, not dramatically. They just stop. And in that quiet decision, they finally begin to live. Mark turned off the light and went to bed. Not because the day was over, but because tomorrow, for the first time in a long while, felt like something he was actually choosing.